Hi all, today we'll discuss about top Java with Spring Boot project real-time interview question latest. So what all are the real-time interview question with Java with Spring Boot? So the first question is what is Spring Boot and how does it simplify Java development? The next question is how do you handle exception in Spring Boot? So we have a multiple ways to handle the exception in Spring Boot. So we have at the rate controller advice annotation and exception handler annotations is there. So how we are using these two annotations to handle this Spring Boot exception handling. The next question is what are the different ways to configure a Spring Boot application? We have multiple ways to configure. One is application property.yaml file or property dot. Other is environment variable. Then command line argument and Java configuration based. So we have at the rate configuration and at the rate bin annotations will be there, which is used. The next question is how do you implement security in a Spring Boot application? So how you implemented? So they will ask some real scenarios and all. So the annotations which we need to use at the rate enable web security. For that, either we will go for the auth2 token based authentication. And all. So we have web security configuration adapters. For that purpose, we use at the rate enables web security. The next question is explain the use of at the rate rest controller in a Spring Boot. So at the rate rest controller is a combination of controller and response body annotation. The next question is how do you connect a Spring Boot applications to the database? So while we connect, either we will go for a Spring Data JPA, JDBC, and other data framework. So for that purpose, we need to add the configuration in property or YAML file. Now the next question is what is the purpose of at the rate Spring Boot application annotation? So at the rate Spring Boot application annotation is a combination of configuration annotation, enable auto configuration annotation, and component scan. The next question is how do you manage dependency in a Spring Boot application? To manage the dependency in a Spring Boot applications, we will go for the Spring Boot starter web. In pom.xml, we will to define this. The next question is what is a Spring Boot starter? So we have multiple Spring Boot starters are there, like a Spring Boot starter web, a Spring Boot starter JPA. So web is used for the Restful web services applications. A Spring Boot starter JPA is used for the JPA and Hibernate. A Spring Boot starter security, which is used for the Spring Boot security. The next question is explain the concept of profiling in Spring Boot. So profile allow you to define different configurations from the different environment. The next question is how do you monitor a Spring Boot application? To monitor the Spring Boot applications using Spring actuators. So which is a features where we have to monitor the applications like health check, metrics, and all. The next question is what is microservice and how do you implement it using a Spring Boot application? Microservice is a small independently deployment service that perform specific business functions. In a Spring Boot, microservice can be implemented by creating separate Spring Boot application for each service, like REST controller, REST API, label tools we will use. So we will use a Spring Cloud configurations, discovery, load balancers, and all. The next question is how do you handle data caching in a Spring Boot? So data caching in a Spring Boot can be handled using a Spring caches, which will provide to cache the data examples, EH caches, Redis caches, and all. The next question is what is a Spring Dev Tools? A Spring Boot Dev Tools and how it is help in development. So a Spring Dev Tool is a modules that provide features like automatic restart, live reload, configurations for the deployments and all. The next question is explain the use of at the rate transactional annotation in a Spring Boot. So at the rate transactional annotations is used to manage transactional declaratively in a Spring Boot. It ensures that entire method is executing within a transaction. Rollback if any exception occur. You can customize the behaviors using attribute like propagations and all. So we have propagations, isolations, timeout, and rollback for this. So these all are the common interview questions for this Java with the Spring Boot real-time interview questions. Thank you.